Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is the first meeting of the Bird Club this fall. I'm Karen Disbrow. I'm the event coordinator, and I usually am the host when we have these meetings. So tonight, our speakers are Terry Vanderwall and Neil Bernstein, authors of The Natural History of the Turtles of Iowa. Neil Bernstein is a retired college professor from Mount Mercy and just recently retired in the last couple of years from teaching at the Iowa Lakeside Lab. Terry Vanderwall is an environmental consultant and an expert in herpetology, right? Right. And he, I don't know if you all remember, but he came and presented on his Lizards and Snakes of Iowa, which he has a few of those books here with him tonight, as well as the new book. They're great guys to work with, and I'm very pleased that they were able to come. So I'm going to shut up and just let them get on with it.
All right. Well, thanks, Karen. We appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you tonight. So as Karen mentioned, I'm Terry Vanderwall, and Neil's behind me here. We're gonna kind of share responsibilities for this talk tonight. So you'll hear from both of us. Both of us have been a little under the weather this week, so I sound a little nasally. Neil's voice might be a little soft, but I think hopefully with the microphones, you'll be able to hear us. Karen did mention this, I guess, is the sort of shameful or shameless self-promotion part of this talk. Karen mentioned the book. Neil and I did have a book come out this year, The Natural History of the Turtles of Iowa. We do have some copies here tonight if you're interested. You can talk to us afterwards, and we can get you a signed copy tonight. I did also bring along a few of the Snakes of Iowa book, Snakes and Lizards of Iowa, if you're interested in that. We can look at those afterwards as well. All right. Well, we'll get going. We're going to talk about turtles to start with. And before we really jump into talking about the turtles, let's just see how smart you all are to start with. I know some of you just had supper, so while you're still on that sugar high from the apple bake or whatever that was, very good, whoever brought that, by the way. There are 5 groups of reptiles that are alive on the earth today. 5 groups that are alive today. Let's see if we can name them. What's one? Snakes and lizards, that's 2. Turtles, of course. Salamanders are amphibians. Alligators and crocodiles. Yeah, those are the 4 easy ones. Alligators and crocodiles, snakes, lizards, and turtles. What's the 5th one? Monitors are lizards. They can be really big lizards, but they are lizards. Dinosaurs were reptiles, that's true, but they're not alive today. Birds. Well, I don't know about Neil. I like to believe that birds are just really glorified reptiles. Neil may not believe that, but
Yeah, yes. No, I was gonna say.
no, we do not see them in Iowa. All right.
They have a hole in the top of their head. They have a hole in the top of their skull.
Yeah, does that help anyway? That's right. Let's see. Hang on a second here. I'll get this to advance for us. Try this. There we go. Oh, actually, let me minimize this. There we go. Yes, the tuatera, right? That's the 5th one. Tuateras they look a lot like lizards, but they have there's some anatomical differences in them. They've been around much longer than our typical lizards, long before the time of the dinosaurs. As Neil mentioned, they do have that hole in the top of their head. It's really like a third eye. It's not an eye that they can get a visual image with like we do with our eyes or like their other two eyes. It just senses light and death or light and death. I'm sorry, light and dark for them. So it's an ancient group. So five groups of reptiles that are alive on the earth today. Tonight, we're going to talk about the turtles, though. There are some characteristics of turtles, or I'm sorry, of reptiles. Characteristics of reptiles that all reptiles share. One of those is that they do have a dry, scaly skin. Someone mentioned salamanders earlier. The amphibians, frogs, toads, salamanders, things like that. They have a moist skin, and in fact, if they dry out, they'll die. So they have to generally remain around these moist environments, wet environments. Reptiles, though, have a dry, scaly skin. Helps hold the moisture inside their body, helps protect them as well, but allowed the reptiles then to move out onto land. Reptiles and actually amphibians and fish are what we call ectothermic or cold-blooded. What's it mean if we say an animal's cold-blooded? Anybody know? Say that one again. So it's really all of those things. Yes, they cannot internally regulate their body temperature. Their body temperature does vary with their surroundings. So they're generally the same temperature as their surroundings, although as we'll talk about later, they're really good at changing that, either warming up or cooling down.
Yes, a three-chambered heart, if I could interject.
Sure, but you'll have to come up to the microphone so everybody can hear you.
So a three-chambered heart was mentioned. What am I doing?
Yeah, the two microphones.
Which one?
The computer and that one.
Oh, the three-chambered heart was mentioned as a potential. You're right. Reptiles have effectively three-chambered hearts, although the crocodiles and alligators have almost a four-chambered heart, and effectively it operates as a four-chambered heart. So that is true.
All right, thanks. Yep. And then the last one is that they do have a leathery shelled egg. So those amphibians, frogs, toads, salamanders have a jelly-like egg. Those eggs have to be laid in the water. Again, the frogs and things like that are not laying them on land. Some of them might lay them in the hollow of a tree or the bowl of a tree, but there's water in there. Their young develop then in the water. Birds' eggs, like a chicken egg, is a hard, brittle shell. Reptiles are somewhere in between. They have this leathery shelled egg. Those leathery shelled eggs for the reptiles have to be laid on land. They don't lay those in the water. So even fully aquatic turtles, like sea turtles, have to come on land to lay their eggs. If they do lay their eggs in the water or the eggs become submerged, they'll die. They're not able to get oxygen through that eggshell while they're underwater. Well, the most distinctive feature of a turtle is its shell. And most turtles, the majority of them, have a hard upper shell and a hard lower shell. And so just some names as we go through the rest of the presentation, and we refer to some of these terms. The upper shell is called the carapace, and the lower, or on the belly side, is the plastron. Those both in the hard-shelled turtles anyway, those are both composed of bone, and that bone forms in these deep layers in the skin. And as the turtle grows, as the young is developing in the egg, and then later on as they mature, that bone forms actually merges with and forms part of the skeleton, so that the ribs and the vertebrae are all part of the turtle's skeleton. So how many of you have seen cartoons where turtles get out of their shells and they walk away and then they get another one, right? Yeah. A lot of times we see it in cartoons. Can that happen? They cannot. And the reason it can't happen is because that shell is part of their skeleton. Hermit crabs can do it, right? But turtles cannot. This becomes really important if the turtle gets injured, say, for instance, run over by a car. As they get injured and it breaks the bone in the shell, it can also break ribs. It can also break the vertebrae, which could cause, spinal cord damage then as well. So injuries to the shells can be pretty significant to the turtles. That bony layer is then covered by scales. We call those scutes. Those are made out of a material called keratin, same material that's found in your hair and your fingernails. Those scales cover the shells, and most turtles are going to shed those. And so the photo here where the arrow is pointing is one of those scales, one of those scutes being shed from this painted turtle. There's a new layer underneath, so they shed those. A lot of reptiles shed their skin. Most reptiles shed at some point. Snakes, you probably know, shed in sometimes one long piece. Lizards shed more like a sunburn on you. So those are the hard-shelled turtles. The soft shells, though, have lost most of they've lost those scutes and they've lost most of the bony material as well. Instead, their shells are covered with this tough leathery skin. Well, turtles are really important in various cultures around the world. Really doesn't matter where you go in the world. Many cultures have either stories or significant parts of their culture that involve turtles. A couple examples here. One from China. Confucius considered there were only 4 holy turtles or holy animals. One of those is a turtle. And in Hindu culture, there's various representations of this, but the turtle, the earth rests on the back of a turtle, and the turtle then might rest on the elephants, or it's the other way around. Not sure which. I don't remember now. At any rate, in this one that's shown on the slide here, the upper part of the shell is the atmosphere, and then the lower part of the shell represents the earth and all of us that live on the earth. Here in North America, the Native Americans also thought highly of the turtles. They used the turtle for many things in their culture, but they also considered the earth, and particularly here in North America, the North American continent, as Turtle Island, right? And Turtle Island was created by a turtle who collected mud on its back, and then the continent developed, rose up out of the water, and people came along after that then. And then even if we think about the Supreme Court building today, some of the foundations of the Supreme Court rest on the backs of turtles, represent that slow and steady progress towards justice. So turtles are really important. And after all, who doesn't love a turtle? Turtles are found worldwide. So on your left, you can kind of see the distribution of turtles, of freshwater turtles on the continents. They're really found everywhere except those extreme latitudes, the Arctic and the Antarctic, for instance. On the right is kind of the distribution of the sea turtles. So sea turtles or turtles are found pretty much everywhere. And again, not a surprise that people around the world then have used them for a lot of different things and often revere them. I'll turn it over to Neil for the next group.
Okay. Thank you. So one of the things that becomes apparent when you study turtles for any length of time is that they're extremely important to the functioning of the ecosystem in the natural world. So in your upper left, you can see a crab that is depredating a small sea turtle. So turtles are food to many animals in the natural world. And especially when you see the sea turtles migrating from their nests down the beach into the ocean, the animals all line up, and gulls will depredate the turtles, and various other mammals will come down to eat these little baby turtles before they even get between the nest and the ocean. They're also good seed dispersers. So many turtles will eat plant material, and in that way, they will disperse the seeds through their digestive tract and help the plant spread. Some of them will also eat carrion, as we'll talk to a little later, dead animals and also dead plants, and therefore they help to recycle the nutrients in the ecosystem as well. And they're also predators themselves. So in the lower left, I hope you can see that, that's an alligator snapping turtle, which has this marvelous adaptation. The alligator snapping turtle is pretty much thoroughly camouflaged, like the bottom of a river where it lives, even the eye. And it opens its mouth and there's a little pink worm-like tongue that starts flipping around there. And that's to attract a fish. And when the fish comes close enough, the alligator snapping turtle will suck it in. And that's how it catches its food. Um, and of course, humans, as Terry pointed out, have also coexisted with turtles for a long time, using them for food, but either the eggs or their flesh, and also using their shells for various functions such as bowls or ceremonies or what have you. So these have been very important in human cultures. And as such, we consider them somewhat of a keystone species. And that means that many ecosystem functions and many other animals and plants rely upon the presence of turtles. So that if you remove the turtles from the ecosystem, things begin to fall apart in various ways. When we look at Iowa turtles, and we'll focus now on Iowa turtles.
Keep this one.
I'm sorry.
There.
Oh, did I go too many?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Iowa has 13 species of turtles. Most of them are aquatic, such as the western painted turtle. Some are mostly terrestrial, like the ornate box turtle. And then we have a few, like the Blanding's turtle, that move between the water and land and use both of these habitats. Loosely, we have the hard-shelled turtles and the soft-shelled turtles, as Terry mentioned. So, and when we look at these turtles, they all have varying distributions and interesting aspects about their distribution in Iowa. So here are two hard-shelled turtles, the western pan turtle and the snapping turtle. And these are found throughout the state. So in these maps, the yellow are where we know have found these turtles since surveys in the 1960s, but were not known prior to that time. The green is when they were known both prior to 1960 and after 1960. And you might ask, what is 1960? Well, it's no magic date. It just marks the time between the early herpetologists who had limited ability to travel, and they were not as numerous as when newer herpetologists, specifically our mentor, Jim Christensen, came to Iowa and began his surveys, and we began to get more in-depth data coming in. And much like you use eBird for citizen science, that has also increased over this time. So it's not as if the turtles were not in those counties prior to 1960. They most likely probably were in many cases. It's just that we didn't know they were there. So we have better documentations coming in. But these are probably our two most widely dispersed turtles, the western pan turtle and snapping turtle. And these are the two you're most likely to see. Pan turtles you see if you're canoeing rivers or in city parks. And snapping turtles are very commonly seen on land, especially when the females are coming on shore to nest. We also have some hard-shelled turtles that are relatively rare. So the Blanding's turtle, which is considered state threatened, and in fact, it's state threatened in every state, I think, in the Midwest where it's found, and has been proposed for federal status, has a much more narrow distribution than either of the previous two. And that distribution in many places is shrinking, and other places is expanding, which is kind of interesting that we're still trying to figure out what exactly is going on with the Blanding's turtle. And Terry's worked quite a bit with it. And so you can see the Blanding's turtle is largely in the northern part of the state, with some in the southeast and some spotty distributions elsewhere, where one of our rarest turtles and one of the most beautiful turtle we have is the wood turtle, which is endangered. And the wood turtle is largely confined to the cedar drainage. Historically, it has a much larger distribution in the eastern United States and a little bit into Canada because its distribution seems to be marked by the remnants of the Pleistocene glaciation, the last ice sheets that came through North America. But Mills County, way down there in southwest Iowa, has a fossil record, or at least a record of a fossil, from over 10,000 years ago. And so this would have been the time when the last glaciers left Iowa about 16,000 years ago, and the prairies started expanding in Iowa about 8,000 years ago. So this is in that transition from glacial to prairie that we have today. And this indicates that the wood turtle may have indeed might have had a much larger distribution in Iowa prior to the current distribution day. And then we have a very interesting complex of hard-shelled turtles, the map turtles. The map turtles get their name because, especially when they're young or in good shape, you can see these little lines radiating around their shell, sort of like topographic lines on a map. So that's where they got their name. And we have three map turtles, the northern map turtle, the Wichita map turtle, and the northern false map turtle. And the Wichita map turtle and the northern false map turtle are very closely related to each other. But the northern map turtle is not that distant of a relative, so that these are actually interbreeding right now. And we can see hybrids between these different species during surveys. You might ask what keeps them apart? Well, obviously not much if they're interbreeding, but historically we can point to some records. So the northern map turtle, the one on your far left, is identified by two major characteristics right off the bat. One is that little oval round spot, which is yellow behind the eye. And then if you look down, the center line of the carapace, it's relatively flat on the northern map turtle. There's not much raised projections. Now, moving to the right, the Wachita map turtle, you can see has this swoosh mark behind its eye. Looks like a hockey stick or something like that. And it also has a little spot under the eye, on the cheek, and one at the bottom corner of the lower jaw. And you can see the ridges now become a little more prominent on that one. It stands out a little bit more than it did on the northern map turtle. And the northern false map turtle has a backward pointing L line, very thin behind the eye, and it has very prominent backward pointing spines on the top of its carapace. To the far left, the northern map turtle is largely confined to the Mississippi drainages and the big rivers up north, like the Iowa and the Cedar, where the Wichita map turtle seems to be very, very confined to the Mississippi drainages. It doesn't get far away from the Mississippi. It has a little more southern distribution out of Iowa. And then finally, the northern false map turtle is the one that has the biggest distribution. It tends to overlap with both of those two turtles in much of its range, but it also has an interesting distribution in the Missouri River along the Luss Hills as well. So I mentioned that if you've taken any basic ecology course, you would say that if these are closely related species, there should be ways that they are kept apart, niche divergence, so they don't interbreed. I'm sorry, did I go too far again?
No, I'm just muting that or minimizing so you can read it. That's good. You're good.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Excuse me. So the most carnivorous is the northern map turtle, where the Wichita map turtle and the northern false map turtle are far more omnivorous. Part of that has to do with the size of the head and the size of the jaw. The northern map turtle has the biggest head and the biggest jaw. So they specialize on eating mollusks, snails, small clams, that sort of thing. And what's interesting within that group, this is really interesting for ecology, the females have bigger heads than the males. So the females tend to eat more snails in some studies, and the males tend to eat smaller shell mollusks or insects. So they actually divide up their feeding habitats within the same species. Um, Now, when we look at the Wichita map turtle, I was to say the northern map turtle is actually doing very well because, first of all, we've introduced some non-native mollusks like the zebra mussel. And then for those of you who know about limpkins, the bird watchers, the Chinese mystery snail has been dispersing too. And so that also adds to their food source too. The Wichita map turtle and the northern false map turtle tend to overlap in their food a little bit more, although the Wichita map turtle tends to feed more on the surface, whereas the northern false map turtle tends to feed at both the surface and the bottom levels. And the Wichita map turtle will feed on the bottom. It kind of bulldozes its way on the bottom, but they seem to feed in different areas. But they both consume a wide variety of insects, plants, carrion, fish. They're omnivorous. Basically, if it fits in their mouth, they're going to eat it. And that gets into this idea of trying to ecosystem functions of being very important for different levels of predation and prey and dispersal of the turtles. Okay.
All right. Try and get this. There we go. Let's try and get that to disappear so we could read those. All right. I think we did. Right. So continuing on with just a few more of the Iowa turtles. One that I think a lot of you probably in the room and hopefully on Zoom have heard about is the ornate box turtle. It's kind of ironic that we switched to me on this one since Neil's the one who's done most of the ornate box turtle work in the state. But the ornate box turtle is another one of our rare turtles. Um, uh, we do get some of the other box turtles that are introduced into the state. Box turtles are often kept as pets. You can tell the difference between the native ornate box turtle and those that are non-native, they're introduced. Ornate box turtles have those yellow radiating lines on the carapace, and they have a similar pattern on the plastron. Some of those non-native box turtles that occur in Iowa might have some radiating lines on the carapace, but they don't have the radiating lines on the plastron. These turtles are unique because they do occur in sand prairies. Sand prairies are probably always rare in Iowa, but have gotten more and more rare as time goes on. We're actually going to come back to that here in a little bit. And again, looking at their distribution, you can kind of see they're scattered around the state. And again, that's going to be in places where there are sand prairies. And the other thing I'll mention about the maps is, though, even though we have an entire county colored in, it doesn't mean that any of these turtles necessarily occur everywhere in the county. And that's really true for something like a box turtle, where they're going to have very specific habitats that they occur in. The red-eared slider, another really popular turtle in the pet trade. If you go to pet stores, particularly in the past, red-eared sliders were the turtles that you would have gotten, you would have seen at the pet store. Still very popular, really popular worldwide in the pet trade. In fact, they're so popular that this species occurs pretty much everywhere in the world, except maybe the Arctic and the Antarctic, not because they naturally occurred there, but because they're introduced. People get them as pets. They have them for a while. They don't want them anymore, and they take them and they let them go in the local pond or the local stream. That's really what we see with their distribution here in Iowa. You can see that I've circled their natural range in Iowa. This was a species that just barely got into Iowa historically. They're more of a southern and southeastern species. Just barely got into Iowa for their natural range. But you can see now that we have records kind of scattered across the state. And that's because those are turtles that have been released, former pets that have been released. So Iowa was at the edge of the natural range of the species, which is true for a number of our turtles and actually snakes and lizards as well. Ritter sliders get their name, by the way. You can see up on the head, directly behind the eye, that red patch. That's how they get their name. They also have one yellow line on each of those scutes on the carapace. Although these are turtles that turn darker as they age, and so they become more melanistic. They get that dark pigment melanin collects in the carapace, and so so older turtles are not as brightly colored as this one. That happens with the head as well, and so that red mark will start to fade as well. A couple of our other rare turtles, in fact, probably the rarest turtle in the state, the yellow mud turtle. Again, one Neil has experience with. Yellow mud turtles are really a desert species. And so as you go south and west of Iowa, southwest into the southwestern United States, they become more common down there. They moved into Iowa during that interglacial period when Iowa was a warmer, drier place before the prairies that we all think of now really developed. As Iowa became cooler and wetter, then prairies developed, some more forest along in the eastern part of the state developed. This turtle became restricted to very southeast Iowa. It again is a sand prairie species and really needs areas of nearly pure sand to live in. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about that one in a bit as well. The eastern musk turtle, another rare species, really it's confined to that lower Cedar River drainage down in southeast Iowa and then along the Mississippi River. And it has been found in the Mississippi as far north as, Clayton and Allamakee County. DNR fisheries biologists pretty frequently trap this turtle when they're trapping fish in the backwaters of the Mississippi up in that area. Both of these turtles, are kind of little drab brown turtles for the most part. Not a lot of coloration on them. Mud turtles have a little bit of yellow on their chin and necks, more or less on the shell, depending on, again, the age of the turtle. Musk turtles have those two lines on the side of the face, so one line above the eye and one below. So those were the hard-shell turtles. We do have two soft shells in Iowa as well, the Midland smooth soft shell and the Eastern spiny. Eastern spiny soft shells, called a spiny soft shell because if you look at that leading edge of the carapace, if you can see my cursor there, leading edge of the carapace here has these tubercles or projections that come out. The smooth soft shell does not have those. There's some color differences, as you can see, the smooth soft shells are often a little more tan. The spiny is a little greenish. Those spines on the leading edge of the carapace are really the easy way to tell them apart. Another way, although you got to really get up and close and personal with the turtle to know this, but you can look in their nose as well. My cursor here, you can see right here, it might be hard to see, but inside the nose of the spiny soft shell, the nostril, the bridge that separates, or the septum that separates the two nostrils, has little tubercles that stick out from either side. Smooth soft shells don't have that. But again, you gotta get kind of close, and not necessarily a great idea with the soft shells. Getting bitten by a soft shell is a little bit like being grabbed by a pair of needle nose pliers. Looking in the nose is probably not the best thing. These two are strictly riverine turtles for the most part. Midland smooth soft shells definitely stick just to the rivers and primarily the large rivers. Eastern spiny soft shells are a little bit more of a habitat generalist. They're in those rivers as well, but they'll also use ponds and lakes. So you might see those, in lakes or ponds. Neil was talking a little bit about that niche segregation that goes on with the map turtles. How we get these similar species living in the same areas, utilizing the same resources, but using them slightly differently. That occurs with these soft shells as well. Both of these turtles are in the same rivers, but they feed slightly differently in the water column and they eat slightly different foods. So those are the 13 turtles species that we do have in Iowa. If we look at habitat use amongst these turtles, some of those are generalists that can be found in pretty much any aquatic habitat. Painted turtles, snapping turtles, that's spiny softshell really fall into that group. Some are habitat specialists, and I mentioned a couple of the sand prairie ones, the ornate box turtle and that yellow mud turtle. And then the other habitat specialists are those that really occur in the rivers, Midland smooth softshell, and then the wood turtle that Neil had talked about a little earlier. So our turtles are using all the different habitats, really aquatic habitats, and in some cases, some of the terrestrial habitats that we have here in Iowa. Diet, turtles eat a variety of plants and animals. It really does depend a little bit on, what species we're talking about. Some are omnivores. Omnivores eat both plant and animal material. Others are carnivores. Carnivores eat only animal material. And so you can see there's a list of food items on the screen. We won't necessarily go through all those, but they're eating. The turtles are eating, the foods that are available to them. Some of them do have unusual feeding strategies, and the wood turtle is a great example of this. Wood turtles have this unique behavior that's called worm stomping. So what's been noticed is that the wood turtles will go out. Wood turtles, by the way, I mentioned they live in the rivers. That's part of the year. The other part of the year, they're on land. They live in these riparian forests, so those forests right along rivers. And the wood turtles will go out, and what was noticed is that at times they'll stomp on the ground, right? And they stomp with their front feet. They might bang their plastrons. And when they do that, earthworms poke their little bodies out of their holes, or they'll start to come out of the hole, and the wood turtles will grab them, and they'll pull them out just like a robin. They'll apply that pressure and pull them out. And so it was thought for a long time that what the wood turtles were doing is mimicking raindrops. So it's thought, when it rains, it's raining hard, the raindrops are hitting the soil, that soil becomes saturated, the worms come out when it rains to get away from their holes that are filling up with water. And so they thought that the turtles were doing this to mimic rain. But recently, there's been some research that has shown that it's not actually the rain that the earthworms are fleeing, but instead it's a predator, and the predator are moles. Moles eat a lot of earthworms. And as the moles are digging through the soil, they're disrupting the soil, they're causing those vibrations. What happens is the earthworms start popping out of the ground to get away from the moles. That's a strategy that works well for the earthworms, unless there happens to be a wood turtle sitting on top, waiting for the worm to come out. And so what happens is that, what this is now thought to be, is something called this rare enemy effect. And that rare enemy effect is this scenario in which a predator catches its prey by exploiting a response that is usually a good strategy. It's usually a good strategy for that worm to get out of the ground when the mole's coming. Again, unless there's a wood turtle waiting on top. So the wood turtles have adapted to using this strategy to get the worms to come out. And thermal regulation, I mentioned this one a little bit earlier, but turtles bask. Like a lot of reptiles, or all reptiles, bask. Most people see turtles when they're basking. Turtles, as we said earlier, are ectothermic, so their internal body temperature is dictated by that, either the air temperature or the water temperature. They're also called what we call poikilothermic, which means their body temperature can vary. So their body temperature varies in general with the air temperature. The reptiles are really good at raising their body temperature or lowering their body temperature, and they use behavior to do this, either move into the shade or into the sun, or maybe into the water or out of the water, to either raise or lower their body temperature. And they can raise and lower their body temperature by a lot when they're doing this. So they use they use thermoregulation, or they use basking to either raise or lower the body temperature, which then affects their metabolism. And so basking can also help with digestion as well. Raise the body temperature, raise metabolism, and makes for more efficient digestion. Basking can also help remove parasites. Turtles get a lot of parasites, like leeches. When they come out and they bask and they sit in the sun, those leeches dry up. And they sometimes will just fall off the turtle. They get too dry. Because this is a birding group, we have to talk about this relationship that the map turtles, like this northern map turtle in the picture, have with grackles. Map turtles, when they bask, often stretch their legs out, like the one in the photo is doing. They'll even spread their toes wide. What happened, and what the grackles have learned to do then, is come in and pick the parasites off the basking map turtles as they do that. So it's good for the turtle, removes the parasites, and it's good for the grackles as well. They get a free meal out of the deal.
Well, we mentioned that the shell is a wonderful adaptation. And if you ask someone why do turtles have a shell, most of them will mention it's for defense. It's a hard armor around the animal that protects it from larger predators. Several of our turtles have hinges on their plastron that will allow their plastron to actually move and tighten up that armor quite a bit. So there's a single hinge in the eastern musk turtle, the Blaney's turtle, and the ornate box turtle. And actually, the yellow mud turtle has two hinges. What's interesting is most of those turtles with hinges can only move them a little bit, but the ornate box turtle can move it a lot. So if you look at the lower left-hand corner, you see an ornate box turtle that's completely closed up into its shell. It's got its head, its legs, and its tail, and it's sealed tight. And I've never tried to force one open, but I've just kind of felt to see exactly how tight it is. You're not going to move it without a lot of force. It's very, very tightly in there. And so a very good defense. The others don't have nearly as strong of defense. They can partially close their shells, but not as tight as that. And you can see why it's called a box turtle. It just basically goes into its little box. Now, eastern musk turtles have another adaptation. They actually, although they have two hinges, if you look, there's an awful lot of skin exposed. They have a very small plastron, which is a great adaptation if you're swimming, but it's not a good adaptation if you're going to be attacked. And so a predator like a raccoon can easily get those appendages. So they have a little odor gland. It's on just below the plastron hinge at the edge of the carapace. And when attacked, they will secrete this horrible smelling fluid. I assume it tastes bad too. I haven't tried that. But the common name for these turtles is called the stink pot. So that's where they get that name. The snapping turtle also has a very small plastron. It's greatly reduced and has a very hard, thick upper shell, but the upper shell really isn't that big compared to the turtle. So it has a lot of exposed flesh as well. As I mentioned earlier, especially females can be seen coming ashore to lay their eggs. So they are the Vince Lombardis of the turtle world, that the Beck's defense is a good offense. So when you are threatened, the snapping turtle will orient its head towards you. It tends to raise up, so it looks big from below. It will sometimes puff out its cheek and actually kind of move its legs and threaten itself, and it will hiss. And that should be enough to tell you not to get any closer. However, if you persist, the snapping turtle has a very fast reflex, as do the soft-shelled turtles that Terry mentioned, and they can extend their neck a lot farther than you think they can. And it's very quick, it's very instantaneous. You're not going to see it coming, but you will feel it. Because when the snapping turtle clamps down, like most turtles and other lizards, it doesn't just take a nip and back off. It clamps down and holds you like a vice grip. And the snapping turtle has the jaw power to actually crush skin and bone and do a considerable amount of damage to you, even the small ones. Well, Terry mentioned that the turtles are ectothermic and poikilothermic. Their entire metabolism is based upon the temperature of the water or the temperature of the land, or if they're basking in the sun. So one of the reasons they bask is also to speed up their metabolism. So oftentimes after they eat, they'll come up bask, and that will get their metabolism going so they can digest their food better before they go eat again. But that means that as the temperature drops in the fall and then into winter, then their metabolism slows. And so they cannot remain active, they cannot actively feed, or they cannot actively defend themselves. So that Iowa turtles go through a period of dormancy in the late fall, winter, and early spring. And they emerge sometime varying times depending on the turtle, some as early as March, and then some may be active into October or November. It also depends on the year. This is looking at the snapping turtle observations, 471 snapping turtles, and you can see that most commonly the observers were seen in June. Of course, that also means that no one was out in December looking for snapping turtles, but so where do turtles go? It all depends. So the yellow mud turtle, the ornate box turtle will actually burrow into the sand dunes, and they will continually burrow below the frost line. And then when the soil begins to warm, they'll make their way closer to the surface. So it's pretty amazing for up to 270 days, those turtles are actually underground where there's no oxygen whatsoever. Aquatic turtles will actually burrow under the mud in ponds. Some will go into muskrat houses or crevices in the banks. Some turtles will congregate on pilings under bridges where there's fast current, where there's oxygen coming through the water. And so it's a wide variety. Terry actually found a Bland's turtle overwintering on land once, so that was kind of an interesting find that he had. We weren't aware of that. But when they go down, in all cases, the water is going to be very cold and it's going to have a good oxygen supply, especially if it's in a river. But the turtle's not going to be getting atmospheric oxygen under those cases, especially when ice forms over the top of a pond or a lake. They can actually exchange gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, through a region in their throat, the bucopharyngeal region, or in many cases, the thin skin of their cloaca, or anus, if you will also provide area where there can be gaseous exchange. So they do undergo gaseous exchange, although they are at a lower state of metabolism. And they have found that some turtles who are overwintering will actually mobilize calcium carbonate out of their bones to neutralize the blood acidity that's forming. What has been interesting in the last decade or so is that many turtles who are in this overwintering under ice will move around. So they found Blanding's turtles and painted turtles actually moving under the ice to different locations, probably to find areas of better oxygen. So that's been interesting. Reproduction takes place on land or very shallow water. So that in the far left picture, you see two ornate box turtles mating, which is one of the more interesting ways to go about mating in the animal world. So the male has a long inner claw, which he reaches under the female's ridge of her carapace. Then he wraps his tail and cloaca under hers, and then he rocks backward. And sometimes they'll be stark still, and sometimes they're just kind of waving like this. And they will do this for 15 minutes or even an hour in some cases. So, and then once they're done, then they part and they go their merry ways. In the case of the Blanding's turtle here, the Blanding's turtle is mating the males on top, the females below in shallow water, which is nice because he's letting her head stay above the so she can breathe. But that is the same basic idea, except he's a little farther up on her shell in that case. So for many of the quiet turtles that have a flatter carapace, the male will actually get on top of the shell, whereas the high dome turtles, like the ornate box turtle, they would not balance up there very well. All female turtles lay their eggs on land. So you see an ornate box turtle, northern false map turtle. And what the female will do is come to a place, usually the same location every time she nests. It may not be every year, but she'll come to the same location. And for the ornate box turtles, we found them nesting almost in the exact same spot in years, almost, pinpoint. And the female will begin to use her hind legs to scoop out dirt or sand, whatever she's doing, to make a cavity for the nest. And you can see the snapping turtle nest here that's been exposed. Turtles often make what's called a flask-shaped nest. So the neck is very narrow, but it widens at the bottom where they actually lay their eggs. After the females lay their eggs, they cover the nest, they walk away. There's no parental investment in the young. The young are on their own at that point in time. Usually the nesting happens sometime in the spring, May to even into early June, and the eggs will, the baby turtles will incubate and they'll hatch from the nest in the late summer or early fall. Some, like the snapping turtle, will actually go to the water. Blanding's turtles do this too, wood turtles do. Others, like the ornate box turtle and some painted turtles, will spend the winter in their nest, usually exposed to freezing temperatures. So they actually have freeze tolerance, that these young baby turtles can be frozen and indeed begin to come out the next spring and assume their life.
So one of the other interesting things about turtles is that turtles do have what we call temperature-dependent sex determination. So unlike amphibians, snakes, and birds and mammals, the sex of baby turtles of many species anyway is not determined by chromosomes, but instead it's determined by the temperature of the nest while the eggs are incubating, so the incubation temperature. So again, temperature dependent sex determination. There's really three different patterns. There's two that apply really to turtles. This pattern one has a single transition zone where high temperatures produce females and low temperatures produce males. So the higher the nest temperature you have, the more females, or maybe all females, and the lower, the more males. So these are for Iowa turtles. These include, the Western painted turtle, the Blanding's turtle, all three of the map turtles, ornate box turtles, and red-eared sliders. And I just put an example of kind of what those temperatures are for Blanding's turtles. Again, if you have nests in the, say, 86 to 88 degree Fahrenheit range, you'll get females. And if you're low 70s to about 80, you'll get males. This can really then affect that sex ratio of the young, depending on where that female lays her nest. Been some work done with map turtles that showed that, map turtle nests that are laid in the shady spots, produce mostly males. Those that are laid on more unexposed sandbars or sunny areas produce more females. Let's keep this in mind. We're going to come back to this in a couple of minutes when we talk about threats to turtles. The other pattern two, then really has two transition zones where you get females produced both at low and high temperatures, and males then are produced at those intermediate temperatures. Here in Iowa, that's the snapping turtle, eastern musk turtle, and the yellow mud turtle. We do have 3 species in Iowa that do have genetically determined sex, so they do have sex chromosomes. The wood turtles and both of the spiny soft shells, or I'm sorry, both of the soft shells. How long do turtles live? The answer is we don't really know. We do know that some of them can live a very long time, though. There has been some work done, field studies that have shown with marked turtles that indicate that some of those can live, 50 to maybe close to 100 years. Landing's turtles can live to be 90 years old. The ornate box turtles, that Neil worked with, can live, 50 to 90 years old, probably, as well. So again, very, very long time. Some turtles in some of the large tortoises around the world, some of those in zoos, 150 to maybe 200 years in captivity. Aging turtles, though, is not really a precise science, and unless you have a turtle that's just come out of the egg, you know the known age, you mark it in a way, and then you can track that turtle for the next 100 years, let's say, and figure out how old it is. Otherwise, one of the things we can do is count the growth rings on the plastron of a turtle. So the photo here is an ornate box turtle, and the red arrows are pointing. I don't know how well you can see those, but they are pointing to these growth rings. So some turtles produce these growth rings on their plastrons that we can see, similar to if you were to cut a tree and look at the rings on a tree. This works, fairly well. They add a new ring each year, and the distance between the rings is some indication of how much they grew that year. But it works pretty well when the turtles are young, but as they get older, it only works to a certain age. Probably 15 or so would be the max, 20 at the outside. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work throughout the turtle's entire life, but you can get some indication of their age, as the turtles are growing. Aging turtles, as we get better marking techniques, and as we get more young turtles or more turtles that are marked when they're young and able to recapture them as they get older, some of these age estimates will get better. Threats. Well, turtles in Iowa, like turtles everywhere in the world, face a lot of threats. And we're going to talk about a few of those here. But, when Europeans arrived here in Iowa, when the first Europeans came in, Iowa was covered mostly by prairie. There were some forests, mostly in the eastern part of the state or along the river, the major rivers. I think probably everyone is familiar with that story. In the interior of the state, there were a lot of interior rivers, these kettle hole lakes, prairie potholes, river oxbows. There were lots of aquatic habitats, in other words. The Mississippi and the Missouri River, right? Iowa's the land between two rivers. Those two major rivers provided corridors for turtles to move into Iowa over time. Prior to sort of that European settlement of Iowa, Iowa turtles, the environment here had been pretty much stable, or at least relatively stable for them for about 4,000 years. But of course, once the settlers moved in, they began plowing up the prairie, breaking the prairie sod for agriculture, so we could plant, eventually corn and beans and other row crops. As they did that, they drained the wetlands, they got rid of the wetlands, tiled the fields, all of these things, so we could, produce more crops. As we drained the wetlands and then we tiled the fields, those tiles became really conduits for fertilizer, erosion, soil that erodes off the soil, or off the land, either fields or stream banks, gets into those tile lines and eventually into streams. All of that, those are pollutants that can affect turtles and other aquatic life as well. Here in Iowa, we've lost about 95% of all of our original wetlands in the state. Streams also were sort of a problem for those early farmers as well. Didn't like the meandering streams through their fields, so they channelized the streams, right? We modified the streams. It's likely every stream in Iowa has had some form of modification at this point. They've been straightened, they've been dredged to make them deeper, levees or dikes built along them to contain floodwaters in the rivers. They've been riprap, that upper picture in the center. Riprap is that rock they place along the stream banks for bank stabilization. Riprap can form a barrier. Think if you're a turtle trying to get out of the water, crawl through that riprap and get above it, particularly a small turtle. Right? They fall between the gaps and can get trapped in there. Dams, most of our rivers, larger rivers anyway, were dammed. Dams also create barriers to movement of turtles, but also fish and other things. As we contain the water in the river, we channelize it, we contain it within those levees or dikes. Water levels may rise, particularly during floods. That can flood sandbars, which is where, for instance, softshell turtles lay their eggs. So it either floods those eggs so they don't hatch, or it deposits sediment out of the water. As the water goes back down, it deposits sediment on those sandbars, which can cover the eggs and eventually kill the eggs, or it makes it unsuitable for the, say, soft shells to nest on them. As we cut water off from the floodplain as well, those floodplain wetlands disappeared. Those floodplain wetlands are important for actually a large number of our turtles. Just quickly, a few examples of threats to some of our rare or imperiled turtles: ornate box turtles, mud turtles, I mentioned before, our sand prairie species. Sand prairies have certainly disappeared throughout time in Iowa. A lot of that is lost to agriculture. Some might be lost to urban development, things like that. But as sand prairies disappeared, so do the box turtles and some of the other sand prairie species. The sand prairies were probably not ever that prevalent in Iowa, or plentiful in Iowa, but even more so today. Land managers who are really well-intentioned, they're trying to do the right thing, trying to help our sand prairies. Sand prairies, as the name implies, have sand. A lot of them have shifting sand. As the wind blows it around. And so as a way to sort of prevent wind erosion, many land managers have planted cedars, red cedars in there as wind breaks. The problem is those red cedars then take off. They also do very well in those areas, and eventually they'll sort of cover the sand prairie. You'll lose sand prairie, you'll lose the plants, and eventually those animals. Yellow mud turtles, also a sand prairie species, so very similar issues with the sand prairies with the mud turtles. But mud turtles also have an aquatic. They use aquatic habitats at certain points during their life, during their annual cycle. So as Neil mentioned, they hibernate in the sand dunes, but then they come out in the spring. They move down to the water, and they'll rest in the water and rehydrate, sort of soak up the water, rehydrate, and then they feed. And they feed in there before eventually they move back out. They also mate in the water. So you need to have both the sand prairies and some adjacent wetlands. In the places where the mud turtles occur, then levees and dikes have been constructed because where they occur is most along the Mississippi River. So these levees and dikes then cut that water off from the floodplains. So we reduce those floodplain wetlands. Also in the area in southeast Iowa, because it is very sandy soils, they have to irrigate to grow crops. So if you like your muscatine melons, they're growing those because they irrigate those areas as well. Irrigation drains water, groundwater, reduces groundwater levels, lowers groundwater levels. And so when that happens, as the groundwater goes down, those wetlands disappear as well. And then wood turtles, mentioned earlier too. Wood turtles need both the river and those wooded floodplains are critical for both. Wood turtles spend part of the time in the rivers, part of the time in those wooded floodplains. As as those wooded floodplains are cut down, as the forests or the woodlands disappear, either through due to agriculture or in some cases urban development, we lose habitat for the turtles. And as you crop right up to the streams, then erosion into the streams becomes a problem. You have no terrestrial habitat, and the stream habitat goes down in quality. The photo here is again, it's a similar picture to what we showed before, is a snapping turtle nest that has been exposed due to erosion. You can see that crop field, that farmer planted crops right up to the edge of the stream, no buffer. And as that stream washes away, the soil begins to just fall away and expose that turtle nest. I suspect eventually his corn stalks are going to fall in the water as well.
Another threat that turtles face, as well as many other reptiles, are what we call mesopredators, middle predators. So historically, you had three basic size groups of predators: small predators like shrews and weasels, and of course, birds might fit in there too. And then the middle group of raccoons, skunks, possums, and then large predators like coyotes and wolves, bobcats. Um, One of the things that kept the medium-sized predators in check was the fact that they had competition from larger predators, and in many cases, they were eaten by the larger predators. So when we removed the larger predators from the ecosystem, we began to give more resources and a safer life for the middle-sized predators, the mesopredators. And then add to that, the mesopredators have a great ability to live with humans. So when humans moved into their barns, their fields, their houses, their garbage dumps, the mesopredators were just fine with that. Raccoons didn't care if they lived in a chimney or a hollow tree or a sewer system. So these mesopredators have begun to increase. Now, problem with the turtles is, as I mentioned earlier, the turtles often come to the same area at the same time of year to lay their eggs. So if you're a mesopredator who wants to eat turtle eggs, you come out on a given night and there you have a smorgasbord of eggs to eat. They're all there for you, and they all were there last year, and they're in a concentrated area. And so predation of turtle nests is very high. Now, that's not just a recent thing. Turtles suffer high nest predation even before there were humans around. It was just one of those things. Turtle eggs were good food. It was easy pickings. But now, with fewer sand prairies, fewer nesting sites, fewer sandbars, the impact is greater, and there's more mesopredators out there. So that it's almost rare in some cases to find natural reproduction of ornate box turtles or yellow mud turtles now without our protection. You can see on the far right a dug up ornate box turtle nest. And the bottom right is a turtle I found when I went out the morning. She was on the nest she was laying. Her legs had been pulled off and were gone. The other front legs were pretty well mutilated, and she was still alive, which there's no way I could save her at this point in time. So I went ahead and euthanized her. But when I opened her up, she still had eggs in her oviduct. This turtle was laying eggs in the process of laying eggs on the nest when the raccoon came up and just ripped her legs out and began to eat them and just left her there. Changing climate is another issue that we have. As Terry mentioned, we have temperature sex determination. I'll get it. Temperature sex determination. So the model graph you see here is for painted turtles, and it's looking at how thermal units are accumulated. So you can see that on one end of the spectrum, you're going to produce mainly males. The axis on the left is males to the total. Then you go through a transition period where you're going to get males and females. And if it increases in temperature, you'll get more females. just what Terry explained. What that means is that if the climate begins to warm enough that it affects the soil temperature and the temperature of the eggs, then we're going to begin skewing the sex ratio towards one sex. And as Terry also alluded to, habitat loss is a problem here. Fred Jansen, who was at Iowa State, documented the change in sex ratios of painted turtles on the Mississippi River. So historically, before we began to dam the Mississippi River, there were areas of sandbars, and some of the sandbars were exposed to the sun, and some areas of the sandbars were in the shade, and the turtles would nest in both those locations. But as the water levels rose to provide shipping channels down the Mississippi River with the levee system and the lock and dam system, those exposed sandbars were flooded. So now the turtles were mainly just nesting in the shade, skewing the sex ratio towards males, I believe. The other threat comes from well-intentioned efforts. And you've probably heard some of the insect people talk about fires for prairie management. And fire is used very often by prairie managers. It's a quick way to begin to reduce invasives and non-natives and also woody plants. And to do so manually, one by one, would take an awful lot of time and labor. So fire is one of the tools that have been used, and fire historically burned the prairies. But these prairies used to be far more extensive than they are currently. And so now when we have concentrated fires going across the landscape, snakes and turtles and other animals are caught in these fires. So from some of our studies on the ornate boxshell, we recommended that the fires not be lit after April 1st. That was before the climate began to change and began to get warmer earlier. So turtles are actually emerging earlier than they used to, and now they can get caught in these controlled burns. And you see on the lower right a turtle who's had its scales that have been burned away, and you're not seeing the seeping fluid that's coming out of the bone tissue there. So the other problem is that many of the turtles have what we call phylopatry. They use the same areas, the same time of year. They'll come back to the same place every time the same year, so that you could have hundreds of years of turtles using a certain area for their nesting or summer. But when that gets turned into a row crop, there's a lot of machinery going across that row crop, and turtles will get crushed in the farm machinery. Or they'll be moving from one field to another or from one area to another, and they're struck by an automobile. So that, Terry, why don't you talk about this a little bit? These slides that your daughter did.
Yeah, so as Neil mentioned, turtles moving either through farm fields or across roads can get struck by the machinery. And, hundreds, probably thousands of turtles are hit every year in Iowa as they cross the roads, a lot of those during the nesting season. The photos on the right are of a painted turtle that was hit by a car. And so the upper one shows the damage to the carapace. Remember, that carapace is part of the skeletal system, right? Ribs, vertebrae, it's bone. So it can be pretty serious. The photo on the lower left on the lower right is one of the ways to repair that shell. So if you do find a turtle that's hit on the road, first of all, if you're going to try to rescue it, be sure you're safe yourself. But turtles are brought into veterinarians or wildlife rehabilitation centers a lot that have been hit on the road. Our daughter is a veterinarian. She treats wildlife, and so these are turtles this is a turtle that she got in actually earlier this year. So they try to put that carapace back together, just like any other fracture. You put the bone back together, they hold it in place, and given enough time, then that bone will heal, assuming that, there are a lot of other injuries to the turtles. So some turtles can survive it as long as that, backbone's not broken, right? If their backbone is broken, they're going to be paralyzed just like we would. Yep, I
Oh,
think
here
I'm
they
next
go.
anyway.
Yeah, it's Terry and Wendy Starr, not Terry, my daughter.
Oh, you're right. I had the wrong hour there. That's right. Um, as we mentioned earlier, turtles are eaten by people, right? We consume them. They are a food, and we do harvest turtles. Here in Iowa, they can be harvested in Iowa. Turtles have been a source of food for, as we said again earlier, people really all across the world. But the indigenous people here in Iowa use turtles for food, and then as the settlers moved in, they began harvesting turtles, and that harvesting continued through time. Eventually, became a commercial enterprise where people were going out harvesting turtles and selling them to other markets here in the U.S. and eventually to other places in the world. Um, so they're not only harvesting live turtles, but they're also in the past anyway would take turtle eggs as well. So we're taking adults or juveniles out of the population, but we're also taking eggs, so the next generations as well. Iowa has and still does allow harvesting by both recreational and commercial harvesters. So recreational harvesters, or if you wanted to go out and collect a snapping turtle to eat, all you need is a fishing license to do that. Commercial, you can't sell it. Commercial harvesters can collect the turtles and then sell either the live turtle or the meat. Throughout much of Iowa's history, turtles were harvested in the state really without any regulations or restrictions. If you think about hunting seasons for other game species, there's almost always a season that you can harvest them in, and there are bag limits. You can only take so many during a certain period of time. None of that applied to turtles for most of our history here in Iowa. There really were no restrictions, either commercial or recreational. Uh, Turtle harvesters use traps, nets, hooks. In the past, one of the ways they would get turtles is to go out in the winter when they are overwintering in stream banks. Take a pole, you poke down through the mud along the stream bank until you hit a turtle shell. Then you dig up the turtle, and you could harvest turtles in the winter that way as well. Many of the turtles, for the last probably at least 40 years or so, harvested here in Iowa, are eventually exported to Asia, where they're used as food. Most of the turtles in Iowa, as this graph shows, were harvested during the summer months, right? The active season, although there are some taken in the winter. But the majority of these were taken during the breeding season of the turtles, and primarily the egg laying season. So what happens is the females either, in many cases, haven't laid their eggs yet. So they're getting ready to lay eggs, but they're caught and they're harvested. And so that generation, right now, not only now have we lost the female, but we've lost her future reproduction as well. Sometimes the harvesters were catching turtles that hadn't reached breeding age yet. And one thing we haven't talked about is turtles take a long time. Most of them take a long time before they reproduce for the first year. Blanding's turtles have to be 13 years old before they breed for the first time. So if you're harvesting turtles before they reach that reproductive age, they're never going to have any young, right? We're not going to have any new any future generations from that turtle. So harvesting during the breeding season is a problem for the turtles, just like it would be for any other species, right? We think about a lot of our other game species. We're not harvesting them while they're breeding, particularly not the females while they're either giving birth or raising young. Well, in 1987, then there were some changes that occurred here in Iowa. It limited the harvest in Iowa. Actually, I should say this prior to. Let me step back here. Let me go back to this. Prior to 1987, what you could harvest in Iowa were painted turtles, snapping turtles, both of the soft shells, and all three of the map turtles were the turtles that were harvested. Theoretically, you could have probably harvested some of the others, but these are the ones that were commercially viable. But in 1987, that changed a little bit. Snapping turtles, soft shells, and painted turtles could still be harvested in any of the waters in Iowa. Map turtles could only be harvested from the Mississippi River and its backwaters at that time. For the first time, commercial harvesters were required to have a license. Didn't need a license prior to that, but there was still no bag limit or season, and you could still collect eggs up through 1987. Commercial harvesters were also required to submit monthly harvest reports. Now they had to finally tell the DNR how many they were catching. So really, from 1987 on, it allows us to get an idea of what was the extent, what was the magnitude of that harvest. Recreational harvesters needed to have a fishing license. There was some restriction on the number of pounds of turtles you could have. Recreational harvesters couldn't sell turtles. You had to use them just for your own personal use. But recreational harvesters didn't have to report their catch. So there's still no records of how many recreational harvesters were catching. There was an update in 2006 then that removed map turtles. So from 2006 on, you could no longer harvest map turtles in Iowa. And they finally prohibited egg collection. In 1993, I, along with some folks from the Iowa DNR, visited at that time the only commercially or the only federally inspected turtle harvest facility here in Iowa. So 1993, we went there. We saw they had primarily snapping turtles they were processing, but there were some painted turtles as well. But that facility at the time told us that they had what they said were 30,000 painted turtle eggs. Actually, it was painted and snapping turtle both. 30,000 turtle eggs. Those eggs were destined for the Asian market where they're going to be pickled and sold as food. So the harvesting of eggs was, at least anecdotally, was huge, but there was no way to record that. They were never required to tell how many eggs they had. So 2006, after that, they couldn't take eggs anymore. So how much, how many turtles did they harvest, or how many pounds did they harvest? So the graph shows from 1987, in the lower or on the left hand of the chart, up through 2012. You can see that in general, turtle harvesting increased in Iowa. It went up and down by year. The lowest point on there was actually 1993. What happened in 1993? The big flood, right? Yeah. Everything was flooded, hard for the harvesters to get out. And so they didn't do that well that year. But in general, turtle harvesting increased through 2012. And so by the time we get to 2012, over 200,000 pounds of turtles were harvested here in Iowa. Most of those snappers and soft shells, but then some painted turtles. Early on, there would have been map turtles as well. But there's still really no limit on the number of turtles, right, that you could take. After 2012, the numbers drop off a little bit, but they still stayed relatively high. They kind of declined in time as turtle meat, I guess, sort of fell out of favor in some cases. One of the reasons that turtle harvest increased in Iowa so much during that time is because we still had no regulations here in Iowa. All the states around us had already banned or severely limited turtle harvesting. And so harvesters from other states were coming to Iowa because they could still collect the turtles here without any restrictions at all. Again, no seasons on them, no bag limits. Females could be taken at any time of the year. Well, in 2017, then in Iowa, that finally changed. There were new regulations in Iowa that did finally sort of severely restrict the harvest here in Iowa. Only snapping and snapping, painted, and soft shells, so no map turtles could still not be harvested. Now there's a season, or more importantly, there's a time of year that you can't harvest turtles. So the harvesting is closed between May 15th and July 15th, that nesting period for turtles. So we're no longer collecting females while they're out there trying to lay their eggs. Recreational, that's for commercial harvesting. and harvesting of soft shells and painted turtles. Recreational harvesters, though, there's still a continuous open season on snapping turtles. There's also now bag limits. So a daily catch of 4 snapping turtles, one soft shell, either one spiny or one smooth, and one painted turtle. And that's really for both commercial and recreational harvesters. Recreational harvesters, there's a higher possession limit than those 20 snapping turtles and five soft shells or 5 painteds. Egg collection still remains prohibited. Well, what you can see on the chart then is prior to 2017, that average harvest in Iowa was a little over 140,000 pounds per year, about 142,000. Remember, it had gotten as high as 200,000 at one point. After 2017, though, you can see that harvest dropped to less than 2,000 pounds. And actually, by the time we get to 2022, it's less than 1,000. It's only a few hundred pounds. Almost all of that is snapping turtles now. So the turtle harvest in Iowa is now regulated and certainly not having the same effect on turtles as it used to.
One of the other reasons people collect turtles is pets. And there's again, a very strong trade overseas, a collection of turtles, mostly box turtles from the United States, where they're sold in other countries as pets, largely England in many cases. And these turtles are often captured illegally on preserves. They're kept very poorly. Many of them die in transit. And then they end up in very strange locations. The other thing that happens is people try to save turtles as they're crossing the road. And there's any number of people, especially coming from Missouri or Arkansas, who bring back a 3-toed box turtle that they saw crossing the road. And they saved it. They didn't want it getting hit, which, is very altruistic of them. They broke federal law in doing so. But the more important thing is that they'll bring these turtles to me and say, well, release them on your study area. Well, first of all, those turtles aren't native to Iowa. Even if they were native to Iowa, they would be bringing in disease, parasites, other viruses, and other genetic components that are not native to Iowa. And the biggest problem, as I mentioned earlier, is many of these reptiles will try to get back home. So when you take a turtle from its native habitat, and you may want to bring it home as a pet, it's going to spend the rest of its life trying to get back to where it was. There's a famous case in Iowa. Just here in Iowa City, there was a population of ornate box turtles near Terry Trueblood. And Terry Trueblood wasn't there at the time. And a development company was going to build apartments and houses there. So the DNR allowed the decision to harvest those turtles and move them to repopulate an area closer to Des Moines, in a natural area in Des Moines. And this area was an area that needed box turtles. So it seemed like a great idea. So they built a pen to put these turtles in, and they built the pen below the surface so the turtles can get out. And that fall, all the turtles were oriented in one corner of the pen trying to get back to Iowa City. So it really is not a good idea to try and move a turtle from a location. If you want to get a reptile as a pet, then there's a couple things to keep in mind. There are reputable breeders who can provide you with papers on how the turtle was bred in captivity and give you its whole history. But you have to remember that reptiles don't crawl on your lap and purr. And they take a lot of care. Feeding them is an interesting thing. Keeping them parasite-free is the problem. So you have to put a lot of care to them. And most of the nature centers around here do not want any more reptiles. They've got lots of saved reptiles that have been brought to them. Also, they live a long time. So as Terry mentioned, some of these box turtles can live well over 50 years, especially in captivity. So that you're into a long-term commitment, and just releasing them is not a good option. one of the questions that's often asked is, what is it that causes the decline of a species? And the answer I have is for anything, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Quite clearly, one cause is not going to be the issue. So in the graphic on the right, you see a graphic for Yellowstone where the historic biodiversity is on the top and the current biodiversity is on the bottom. And what dictates what animals and plants are present in the current state is due to the combination of several factors: exploitation, habitat change, invasive species, isolation, fire, disease, climate change, all of those things. So it's not any one thing, it's a combination of things that actually cause the demise of a species or ecosystem. And turtles, we've talked about habitat loss, we've talked about mesopredators, we've talked about stream modification, harvesting. Pollution is another issue that certainly this can decrease their food sources, if not make it harder for them to find their food. Climate change, we've talked about. Invasive species, we talked about the map turtles actually do well under some invasive species, but that's not going to always be the case for many of these turtles. And moving the red-eared sliders around the state adds more competition to turtles that were already there. And again, can move disease and parasites. Then agriculture and aquaculture. We talk about agriculture, but aquaculture seems like a great idea if we're looking to feed humans. But there's usually non-native species that escape, oftentimes chemicals and antibiotics or feed sources that can get into the ecosystem and cause unintended changes. So we do try and protect several species in the state. There's an active group that Terry heads that tends to, every 10 years, look at the species conservation status and determine how we're going to rank these species. And that helps the DNR prioritize areas to protect and also provide grants for the study of these species. Habitat, of course, is extremely important. And we also have a thing called head starting, which you see here. Then in some cases, we know that the nests are going to be depredated by a mesopredator, almost certainly, so that the nests are harvested, the eggs are raised in captivity. When the young hatch, they're protected and fed, and then they're released at a larger a larger size in an area where we need to repopulate the turtles. So the people in Missouri who were head starting ornate box turtles were releasing their turtles at 3 to 4 times the weight of a hatchling. So that turtle had a good head start when it made it. As Terry alluded to, one of the problems we have with turtle conservation is that anything we do is going to be slow to take effect. Even though that we have reduced the threats from harvesting, turtles do not have a quick, high reproduction rate. So if you think about this, it makes sense, but ordinarily you have to realize it. A female snapping turtle, let's say she lives 35 years, that might be a good average. During that time, she may nest 10 to 15 times. She'll lay 30 eggs in a clutch. So we're talking about, well over 4,000 eggs. Only 2 of those eggs have to reach reproductive state for a reproductive population. So that turtles do not have a high reproductive rate. They have always had high nest predation. They've always had high predation of young, and not many of them make it to reproductive age. So even when we have conservation measures in place, it will be decades before we begin to see the effects of these things. But on the other hand, every individual removed from the population, especially a female, every nest lost, has a much more serious consequence on long-term species survival. So we all need to pitch in and try and have a difference here. So this is the slide where you're at the end of the talk. So we have a lot of people to thank. Wendy, Terry's husband, and my wife Renata, who didn't know what they were getting into. Jim Christensen, our mentor at Drake University, Holly Carver, who helped us publish both books, the photographers, my daughter did illustrations on the turtle book. The DNR and the Wildlife Diversity Program gave us grants to do the research. My students at Mount Mercy and Cornell College students worked on the ornate box turtles and in some cases the yellow mud turtles. Jim Christensen started an extensive collection at Drake University, and we use that a lot for finding diet and reproductive potential, and also the collections at other universities across the United States. The P.J. McElroy Foundation, which funds undergraduate research, Bioacademy of Science, Bayer Corporation, Mid-American Energy that allow research at Big Sand Mound, the Corps of Engineers, who own a lot of the land we did our work on, the Nature Conservancy, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then a lot of the colleagues that helped us not only in the past, but also to give us information for this book. Sandy Rhodes, Andy McCullum, Bob Black, Josh Odden, Jeff Tamplin, Danny Hughes, and Don Becker. And there's many more individuals that we can name. And now that we're at the last one, the Bank of Annual and the Bank of Bernstein. We do have the books for sale afterwards. We've kept you a long time, so thank you very much. We're selling them a slight discount rate. So individually, we'll sell them for $35, or if you want to buy both, we'll sell them for $60 for both of them together. And we'll add in a signature too. So thank you very much.